For so many young people today, the idea of owning a home it feels less like the American dream and more like an impossible fantasy. So, what happened? How do we get here? In this explainer, we're going to dig in and investigate the deep historical roots of today's housing affordability crisis.
Okay, let's just dive right into the big question, right? The one that's on pretty much everyone's mind, especially if you're a millennial or Gen Z. What in the world happened to make buying a house feel so completely out of reach?
And the reality, wow, it is staggering. As things stand right now, nearly 60% of all households in the United States simply cannot afford to buy a median priced home. And that's not just a feeling. It's a cold, hard statistical fact that really defines the market we're all living in. So, to figure out what's really going on, we're going to treat this whole thing like an investigation. And every good investigation starts at the scene of the crime. In our case, that's today's housing market, a place where that dream of ownership seems to be fading, and fast. Now, get this. The crucial point here is that this isn't just a problem for people with low-wage jobs. Even if you're making what's considered a really solid income, say 75 grand a year, you are still priced out of almost 80% of the entire market. That tells you the problem is much, much bigger. It's systemic. All right, so our first major clue in this whole economic mystery is a word we hear all the time: inflation. But to really get its role in the housing crisis, we have to look past the headlines and see how it's actually measured. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. The main tool everyone uses to track inflation is something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The easiest way to think about it is like a standardized shopping cart full of stuff. By tracking how much that cart costs over time, economists can get a read on how much our purchasing power is changing. And this slide shows you what's actually in that basket. As you can see, housing is by far the single biggest piece of the pie. It's over 41%. Now, this includes things like rent and utilities, but as we're about to see, the way it's calculated might be missing the bigger story when it comes to actual home prices. And here's the trend line. Whoa. From a value of about 40 back in 1971, the CPI has absolutely exploded to over 300 today. We're talking a more than 600% increase. It means the value of a dollar has just been completely eroded over the last 50 years. Something clearly happened right around the early 70s. So to understand that huge shift, we need to rewind the clock. We're going back to a really pivotal moment in economic history, back to 1971, to see if we can uncover the motive behind this whole inflation surge. Okay, so before 1971, the US dollar was on the gold standard. What that means is its value was literally tied to a physical thing, gold, which put a natural brake on how much money could be created. After 1971, though, we moved to what's called a fiat currency system. That's where the dollar's value is just based on faith in the government, with no physical anchor at all. This one event, on August 15th, 1971, it's famously known as the Nixon shock, is when the dollar's last link to gold was cut. Now, this decision was made to deal with some big economic pressures at the time, but it totally changed the nature of our money. And as you can see on the timeline, it kicked off an era of much higher and much more stubborn inflation. So, how do we connect a decision from 1971 to today's housing crisis? Well, this is where we see what's called the Great Divergence. It wasn't just that the price of milk and gas went up, it's that a massive split was created between how fast asset prices grew and how fast our paychecks grew. And just to put this inflation into perspective for you, a single dollar from back in 1971 would feel like having $7.50 in your pocket today. That just shows you how much the value of our money and our savings has tanked in just a single lifetime. Okay, this table right here. This is the smoking gun of our investigation. Just look at these numbers. The CPI, our measure for the cost of living, it went up over 600%. Median household income, it went up over 700%. Not bad. But then, look at the median home price. It exploded by 1,500%. Housing has completely and utterly detached from everything else in the economy. Let me put that another way. Back in the 70s, a typical house cost about 3 times the median household income. Totally doable for a lot of people. Today, that ratio has jumped to over 5 times. And in a lot of cities, it's way, way higher than that. Your salary just hasn't stood a chance against the price of a home. And this isn't some random coincidence. It's a specific phenomenon, and it's called asset inflation. In this new money system, when new money gets created, it doesn't just flow into everyday goods. A ton of it flows into assets, things like stocks and, you guessed it, real estate, pushing their prices up way faster than our wages can ever hope to grow. So, after looking at all the evidence, what's the verdict? What does this whole 50-year story of money, inflation, and housing really mean for a young person just trying to find a place to call their own today? You can really see this clear chain of events, like dominoes falling. The move off the gold standard opened the floodgates for the money supply to expand. That led directly to asset inflation, which caused housing prices to just skyrocket past wage growth. And the result? Well, it's the generational affordability crisis we're all dealing with right now. So what's the bottom line here? What should you take away from all this? First, today's housing crisis isn't new. It has deep roots in a huge economic decision made 50 years ago. And second, that decision unleashed asset inflation, where home prices grew so much faster than wages that it created this profound generational gap in opportunity. And all of this brings us to one final, kind of heavy question. When the numbers tell a story this clear, you really have to ask, is the dream of owning a home something that was once a cornerstone of middle-class life? Is it just fading into history for good? That's a question a whole new generation is being forced to answer.